What do you do when even death doesn't escape segregation? Sugar Ray Robinson faces this impossible question at Detroit's most prestigious funeral home, when the director tells him Negroes use the separate section in back. What Robinson does in the next 30 minutes doesn't just change funeral policies, it proves that dignity matters more in death than it ever did in life. Detroit, Michigan, November 23, 1956. Thursday afternoon, 1:15 p.m., Eternal Rest Funeral Home stands like a marble cathedral on Jefferson Avenue. Towering columns frame the entrance. Stained glass windows cast rainbow light across mahogany floors. Crystal chandeliers hang from vaulted ceilings. The scent of white lilies mingles with grief, and the institutional smell of formaldehyde masked by expensive air fresheners. This is where Detroit's elite say their final goodbyes. Where your last respects get measured by your social standing, your bank account, and most importantly, the color of your skin. Sugar Ray Robinson adjusts his black morning suit as he approaches the main entrance. 35 years old, multiple world champion, the most famous boxer alive. In his hands he carries white roses, Joe Thompson's favorite flowers. Joe, his childhood friend who died of a sudden heart attack 3 days ago at age 34. Too young, too sudden, too unfair. They grew up together on Detroit's rough east side, shared dreams of escaping poverty through boxing. Joe wasn't talented enough to turn professional, but he became Robinson's biggest supporter, attended every fight, celebrated every victory, never asked for money or favors, just friendship, pure unconditional friendship, that lasted through Robinson's rise to fame and fortune. In Robinson's mind, honoring Joe should be simple. Friend dies, friend gets mourned, friendship transcends everything else. But Detroit in 1956 operates by different mathematics. Mathematics where even your final goodbye gets calculated by racial hierarchies that follow you to the grave. Funeral director Charles Whitman intercepts Robinson at the entrance. 52 years old, 30 years managing Detroit's most prestigious funeral establishment, expert at maintaining social distinctions while managing family grief. His gray suit is immaculate, his manner professionally sympathetic, his purpose absolutely clear: maintain the establishment's standards without causing public scenes. "Excuse me, sir," Whitman says, approaching with practiced condolence, mixed with unmistakable authority. "I believe there may be some confusion about the service arrangements." Can you imagine Robinson's bewilderment, coming to mourn a lifelong friend, and being told there's confusion about your right to be there? "No confusion," Robinson replies firmly. "I'm here for Joe Thompson's viewing. 2 o'clock service in the main chapel. Joe is my oldest friend." Whitman studies Robinson's expensive suit, perfect grooming, obvious wealth and status, recognizes the famous face from newspaper sports pages. But none of that changes the fundamental equation governing Eternal Rest Funeral Home. Black mourners, regardless of fame or fortune, use separate facilities. Policy is policy, standards must be maintained. Mr. Thompson's service is indeed scheduled for 2 o'clock, Whitman confirms with professional precision, but our colored attendees utilize our auxiliary viewing facility, much more intimate atmosphere, better suited to your community's cultural preferences and comfort level. Your community's preferences. The euphemism that transforms institutional segregation into voluntary choice. The language that makes discrimination sound like accommodation. Picture the crushing weight of this moment. Robinson's childhood friend lies dead, and even in death, Jim Crow laws reach beyond the grave to separate mourners by skin color. Cultural preferences. Robinson's voice remains controlled, but steel enters his tone. What culture prefers to mourn friends in back rooms while others get main chapels? Whitman shifts uncomfortably. He's handled these conversations hundreds of times, but never with someone of Robinson's stature, never with someone who challenges the euphemisms directly. "Sir, I understand your disappointment, but we have long-standing policies that ensure all families feel comfortable during their time of grief. Different communities have different needs." "Different communities," Robinson interrupts, "or different skin colors." The directness catches Whitman off guard. Usually people accept the explanation, take the auxiliary room, understand their place, but Robinson is forcing him to acknowledge what everyone knows but nobody says, that segregation follows people from birth to burial. Behind them, other mourners begin arriving. White families in expensive black attire, speaking in hushed reverent tones. They enter the main chapel without question, without explanation, without anyone suggesting they might prefer auxiliary facilities, better suited to their cultural preferences. But what Whitman doesn't realize is that he's not just challenging Sugar Ray Robinson's right to mourn. He's challenging Robinson's understanding of what Joe Thompson's friendship meant, and that's a fight Robinson won't lose. "Mr. Whitman," Robinson says, reaching into his jacket pocket, "let me ask you something. Joe Thompson was my friend for 25 years. We grew up together, supported each other through everything. When he needed money for his mother's medical bills, I helped. When I needed someone to believe in me before anyone else did, he was there. Now he's dead. And you're telling me our friendship gets segregated because of my skin color. Whitman glances nervously at the arriving white families, important people, board members, major donors, people whose comfort and expectations matter to the funeral home's reputation and financial success.
Mr. Robinson, I'm sure you understand that maintaining appropriate atmosphere requires certain arrangements.
Appropriate for who? Robinson asks. For Joe's white relatives who might be uncomfortable mourning alongside his black friends? Or for the funeral home's policy of treating grief differently based on race? The question hangs in the air like incense, forcing Whitman to confront the logic or illogic of segregated mourning. Other mourners are starting to notice the conversation. White families pausing to watch. Black families arriving and being quietly directed toward the auxiliary entrance. The social machinery of segregation operating in full view. Can you feel the tension building in that marble lobby? The collision between personal grief and institutional racism? Between lifelong friendship and social boundaries that won't bend even for death? Robinson pulls out his wallet, opens it to reveal more cash than most people earn in years. Mr. Whitman, I'd like to make a donation to this funeral home, $5,000, in Joe Thompson's memory, to ensure his service receives the dignity and respect he deserves.
Whitman stares at the money. $5,000 would fund renovations, new equipment, staff salaries, more than most families spend on entire funerals, but accepting it means allowing Robinson into the main chapel, means violating the unspoken rules about racial separation.
Sir, your generosity is appreciated, but our policies aren't about money. They're about maintaining appropriate arrangements for all our families. Then what are they about? Robinson asks. If it's not about money, and it's not about Joe's wishes, he specifically asked me to speak at his service. What exactly determines who gets main chapel access and who gets relegated to back rooms? Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. Everyone in the lobby listening. Everyone understanding the question Robinson is really asking. What makes white grief more important than black grief? Whitman looks desperately toward his assistant director for support, but no help comes. He's been backed into a corner by Robinson's relentless logic and forced to defend policies that sound reasonable in private conversations, but horrific when stated publicly. This is where everything changes, where grief meets justice, where personal loss becomes social protest. Mr. Whitman, Robinson says, his voice carrying through the marble lobby, I'm going to ask you a direct question in front of all these people. Do you believe that Joe Thompson's friendship with me becomes less important because I'm black? Do you believe that 25 years of brotherhood should be segregated in death? The lobby goes completely silent. Even the arriving families stop their whispered conversations to listen. This is no longer about funeral arrangements. This is about the fundamental question of whether friendship transcends racial boundaries. Even in death, Whitman's face goes red. He can't answer yes. Not publicly. Not in 1956. Not in front of witnesses. But he can't answer no either, because answering no would invalidate every segregation policy the funeral home maintains. But Robinson isn't finished. He's about to deliver the most powerful argument of all. Ladies and gentlemen, Robinson addresses the gathering crowd. You're witnessing something important. This funeral home is telling me that my 25-year friendship with Joe Thompson, a friendship that transcended poverty, success, joy and sorrow, must be segregated in death because of the color of my skin. He turns back to Whitman. But here's what I want you to consider. When Joe was dying in the hospital, do you think his heart stopped beating differently because he had black friends? When his family needed support, do you think their grief felt different because people of all colors loved him? When God called Joe home, do you think heaven has separate sections for people who loved him? Can you imagine the power of those words echoing through that funeral home? The spiritual authority of connecting earthly segregation to heavenly unity. An elderly white woman steps forward from the crowd. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, Joe's aunt, 78 years old, Old Detroit Society. Everyone expects her to support the funeral home's policy. Instead, she surprises everyone. Mr. Robinson, she says in a clear, strong voice, Joe talked about you constantly, said you were the brother he never had, said you kept him grounded when life got hard. If this funeral home thinks your friendship should be segregated, then maybe we're in the wrong place. The lobby erupts in whispers. Mrs. Patterson just challenged the funeral home's segregation policy, a white society matron choosing friendship over racial boundaries. Other family members nod agreement. Joe's cousin Robert steps forward. Sugar Ray, Joe wanted you to speak at his service. In the main chapel, anyone who has a problem with that doesn't understand what Joe was about. Whitman realizes he's losing control of the situation completely. The family is supporting Robinson. The crowd is listening. His carefully maintained policies are crumbling under the weight of actual human relationships. But then something unexpected happens. The auxiliary room door opens, and a stream of black mourners emerges. Joe's neighbors, co-workers, friends from the old neighborhood. They've been listening through the thin walls. They heard every word Robinson said. James Wilson, Joe's longtime co-worker, approaches the main group. We've been squeezed into that back room like we're second-class mourners. But hearing Sugar Ray speak up made us realize something. Joe wouldn't want his funeral segregated. Joe treated everyone the same. Maybe it's time this place did too. Now Whitman faces a complete breakdown of his segregation system. White family members demanding integration, black mourners refusing separation, and Sugar Ray Robinson standing in the middle, forcing everyone to choose between policy and principle. The pressure becomes overwhelming. Cancel the service and face community outrage, or integrate the chapel and face board member fury. Mr. Whitman, Robinson says quietly, you have a choice. Honor Joe Thompson the way he lived, bringing people together regardless of color, or dishonor his memory by enforcing divisions he would have hated. Mrs. Patterson adds her voice. This is my nephew's funeral. I want everyone who loved him in that main chapel. Together, the way Joe would have wanted. The crowd pressure becomes undeniable. Family members supporting integration. Community leaders watching. Reputation hanging in the balance. Whitman makes the only decision he can make. Very well, the main chapel will accommodate all mourners, together. The lobby erupts in quiet approval. But the victory isn't really about seating arrangements. It's about proving that human connections can overcome institutional barriers when people stand up for what's right. The service that follows is unlike anything Eternal Rest Funeral Home has ever hosted. Integrated mourning, black and white families sitting together, Robinson delivering a eulogy that speaks to Joe's ability to see people as individuals rather than races. A celebration of friendship that transcended social boundaries. What happened in those 30 minutes changed more than funeral home policies. It changed how an entire community thought about segregation. If death couldn't separate true friendship, why should life? Within 6 months, Eternal Rest quietly integrated all services, not because management had changes of heart, but because families demanded integrated services for loved ones who had lived integrated lives. The economics of segregation crumbled when customers demanded equality. Other funeral homes across Detroit heard about the Robinson incident. Progressive funeral homes began advertising integrated services as selling points. The Detroit NAACP used Robinson's confrontation as a model for challenging segregation in other industries. Charles Whitman never admitted his policies were wrong, but he never again directed black mourners to auxiliary rooms. The memory of being publicly challenged by Sugar Ray Robinson haunted his professional conscience. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson became an unlikely civil rights advocate after Joe's funeral. At 78, she began questioning segregation practices in Detroit society, using her influence to push for integration wherever she encountered resistance. The story spread through Detroit's black community with lightning speed. Word traveled through churches, barbershops, neighborhood gatherings. Robinson hadn't just integrated a funeral, he'd proven segregation could be challenged successfully when communities united behind principle. National newspapers picked up the story. The Amsterdam News ran it front page. The Michigan Chronicle featured interviews with family members who supported Robinson's stand. Jet magazine included it in their civil rights coverage. Robinson received hundreds of letters from people sharing experiences with segregated funeral homes. The incident gave them hope that change was possible. But the most meaningful response came from Joe Thompson's mother, Sarah. Thank you for honoring my son the way he deserved. Your courage gave Joe the send-off he would have wanted. Years later, the confrontation was remembered as an early example of effective segregation challenge. The strategy became known as Robinson's method in civil rights circles. Use your platform, state your case clearly, force opponents to defend indefensible policies publicly, rally community support, create economic and social pressure for change, win through moral authority rather than physical confrontation. Ministers across Detroit began referencing the funeral home incident in sermons about Christian brotherhood transcending racial divisions. If segregation was wrong in life, they argued, how could it be acceptable in death? The theological implications challenged congregations to examine their own prejudices. Business leaders took notice of the economic pressure Robinson created. When communities unite behind principle, discriminatory businesses face real consequences. The Eternal Rest incident became a case study in how celebrity influence, properly channeled, could advance civil rights without violence or lengthy legal battles. Robinson understood something powerful that afternoon at Eternal Rest Funeral Home. Sometimes the most important fights aren't in boxing rings or on political stages. They're in everyday moments when institutions force you to choose between accepting discrimination or demanding dignity. When someone with influence uses it to honor friendship over prejudice. The victory wasn't about seating arrangements. It was about proving human connections transcend artificial boundaries, that love is stronger than hate, that friendship matters more than policy, that some relationships are too important to segregate, even by death. Joe Thompson's funeral became more than goodbye to a friend. It became a declaration that integrated living demands, integrated dying, that true friendship creates bonds too powerful for prejudice to break. Think about friendships in your life that transcend social boundaries. The people you love regardless of differences others might emphasize. The relationships that matter more than other people's comfort levels. Because 30 minutes of standing up for friendship can change policies that seemed permanent, can prove love is stronger than institutional hatred, can demonstrate some bonds are too sacred to segregate, even by death itself. Robinson didn't just honor Joe Thompson's memory, he honored everyone who refuses to let prejudice divide what genuine affection has united.